Morning, Chris. How you doing today?
Morning, Ron. Doing great. How about yourself?
Doing great. Today's another great
Awesome.
topic.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking for these topics. You guys have been coming in the comments and asking for some great topics, and it
Yep.
makes it a lot easier for Chris and I to queue these up. So today we're going to actually talk about the quoting process on a multi-vendor marketplace. So, Chris, what the heck is that? It sounds complex.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most powerful things about a marketplace is getting information from multiple competing vendors, right? So
Yeah.
that's really all that we're talking about here. Depending on the business model and the particular products or services in question, or possibly both, right?
Yeah.
This can be pretty detailed. So there might even be sort of like, just a process to find the items, find the vendors who might be appropriate to bid on these. There's a process for notifying all the vendors and notifying you whenever, let's say, someone who's watching this is sort of representing the person who's requesting a quote. Like, what would the notification be to them and to the different vendors? A lot of times on a marketplace, the vendors aren't necessarily watching closely all the time. And
Right.
so we've got to make sure that we're coordinating all those pieces. So we're going to be kind of unpacking that and also talking about how to make this work within your business model, depending on how your business works, some things to think about. You may or may not need all of these. We've got them timestamped so you can jump ahead if you'd like, but there are quite a few considerations that we see where folks will start with a quoting process and they don't necessarily think about these steps up front. And so we want you to be aware of them going into it. So, what are your thoughts, Ron? Should we dive right into some of the first ones here?
Yeah. So obviously, as you guys well know, Chris is the technical one on the audience. So I'm going to give examples and talk about the business implication, and Chris is going to then tell us how it's built, how it works, the back end, how we deal with that kind of stuff. So I'm going to start with just giving a couple of use cases where we've actually built this out recently for a couple of our
Awesome.
clients and why they had to do it. So the first one was a pool supplier. So this pool supplier built a marketplace. They didn't sell any pool products. They were the marketplace. So within the first few months of building this, we had over 281 vendors selling 405,000 products in this marketplace. So it was very, very rapid. So typically what would happen on this one is, let's say I'm a pool contractor and I'm building quite a few pools and I've got 25 pools going on for the month of July. And I know that if there was a Costco of pool parts, I could buy in bulk. And a lot of the pool equipment, the heaters, the heat exchangers, the pool pumps, I know if I could buy those in bulk, I should be able to get a discount. Where can I do that? And that was this marketplace. So I could go on the marketplace and I could say, hey, I need 25 uh, Pentair variable speed pool pumps to be able to handle pools of size, whatever size, 1.5 horsepower, 1 1/3 horsepower, whatever they are. And I could go in and bid and submit that. And the platform just automatically on the back end said, oh, let's go look up all the vendors that supply that particular pump. And let's go send them a quote and ask them if they want to bid for this. And that's what this did. That was one use case. Another one was we did one for a New York county. There were a lot in this county out on Long Island. There are a lot of townships and a lot of small, they called them townships, not villages or whatever, but they
Hmm.
were small enough that they couldn't afford like their own snowplows. So when the snow would hit, there might be 10 townships that would have to share a truck because they couldn't afford a truck. And they didn't know how to deal with that. So we built this marketplace where they could go in and bid and say, hey, is there anybody out there with a snowplow that wants to come plow? We know that a storm's coming in this week. We're going to need services on, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday morning. Anybody want to bid for that? And nearing cities could go in and bid for that job and take those jobs. So there were some great marketplaces that we did that did this specific thing. So we're going to go in and talk about how that platform. But before we do, let's talk about reasons why. Why would we build this marketplace? Why would we select a particular vendor? How do we know when we get on there that we're not just selecting the worst vendor or a reputable vendor. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk about some of the things that the platform that we typically build into these marketplaces to help a purchaser make a decision. Because a lot of times, and I know this is true with a lot of the government entities, right, that I see a lot of times, they call and go, hey, do you guys want to participate in our request for bid? I know they have to get 3 bids. I know they're always going to go with the cheapest, depending on what we're building and how complex it is. I know whether we're going to be the cheapest or not. Sometimes I don't want to participate because I don't want to spend hours putting together a bid that I know is just fodder so they can go get a cheap bid, right? So how, Chris, does the platform help me, the buyer, figure out which vendor to choose?
Yeah, good question. And there are a lot of different factors here because it depends on what it is exactly that we're looking at. But one of the most standard things is making sure they have good ratings and reviews. Now, we can make these ratings and reviews very high fidelity. So we can have customers who have worked with this vendor go in and provide ratings and reviews for different aspects of the experience, of the actual end product or service result, and basically different key categories of what the process was like. How timely were the responses? Was what they promised or estimated, was it met or was it very far off? What was the actual quality of the products or services implemented, et cetera, et cetera. And so these are really basic things that should be turnkey in your marketplace platform. And really, one of the things that I would say to this too is that a lot of vendors, when they first get started in a marketplace, they need to get these reviews. So there needs to be a way for them to request reviews from customers who haven't necessarily purchased through the site, so that they can sort of boost their profile right away, but also not make it so that it's so easy to fake those somehow, that they could, basically simulate having really high reviews. So sometimes
Right.
that can be really important to get vendors who are large companies, reputable, companies, to be able to get reviews from their past customers that weren't on the platform. But ultimately, it would ideally be, from transactions on the platform, the purchaser is going to then do a review of the seller. Now, this is some of the most basic sort of validation, but it's also possible to do certain verification of certifications, areas of specialization, even do sort of a business audit, and make sure that there's some kind of a process to validate that this business is not only a real business, but we can check certain things through the platform with APIs. We can also look at financial statements and credit history. I mean, we can do all kinds of things to really get a good sense of those different vendors and making sure they're valid. And then finally, another thing that we see a lot of that makes a lot of sense is requiring that the vendors select a finite set of focus areas. So what are their actual focus areas? What are their strengths? And they have to pick. Now, depending on your business model, this may or may not make a lot of sense. But ultimately, Ron, the big thing that we're looking to do here is we're looking to get multiple different facets of the selection process, which typically includes, what is the service level? What is the timeliness? What's the professionalism of the organization itself? And then we're also looking at generally what are people's experiences with different offerings. So, they may have different offerings where they have different strengths and weaknesses. And then ultimately, we want to make sure that they're actually a reputable business. And being able to verify this through the marketplace can really drive a lot of trust and integrity within your market. Think about it.
Right.
If you have a marketplace and the vendors aren't that trustworthy, you don't really have much to offer your buyers, right? I mean, they
True.
can't even trust who they're going to be working with. So it ends up being pretty challenging to sort of see it adding more value than just a phone book, essentially. And so you want to sort of differentiate yourself from that with the credibility and the standards that you require of your vendors. And, some of the things that I've seen here too, Ron, are vendors aren't even allowed to be part of the quote process unless they meet certain criteria. And that can help them sort of be encouraged to go through those steps so they can start receiving quotes. So you
Right.
can definitely look at it as like a gamification process where they have to do certain things to get certain things and just encourage them to do the right things to move forward. So any thoughts on that on your end?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. You can start them out and say, once you have 3 reviews that are reviewed by our team, you can be submitted into the process or included in the directory, or we'll start sending
Exactly.
you leads or things like that. Other things that I care about too, obviously, I love the one about the third party APIs you said, like linking out to a Better Business Bureau or a DUNS number
Yep.
so that it's really easy where they go out and click and they can see their DUNS rating. They can see that this vendor's a D plus and this vendor's a B plus just right on the list. Well, I'm not going to waste a lot of time on the D plus vendor potentially, right?
Right.
Other things basically on the marketplace for me, if I'm doing this, matter of fact, for those of you that don't know or are seeing Chris and I for the first time, I was actually a Clarity client for 2.5 years before I joined. And one of the things that, was a big deal to me is when can I have it? One of the very first projects Chris and I worked on together was a sales portal. And Chris and I worked together some late nights,
Yep.
making sure we got that out and launched. We had 5,000 sales reps we were launching this to, including Microsoft and Oracle and some big players. And I didn't want to be late. I got up at a show and I told them they would have it on a date. And by God, it was going to hit that date. And Chris came through. And that was one of the things that I needed when I selected Clarity as a vendor was I needed to know I could rely on a vendor. If I needed, if the chips were on the table, could I rely on that vendor? And that's how Chris and I became not only I became a client, but we became friends and ultimately ended up
Yep.
wanting to work together. And now we've worked
Yeah.
together. I'm coming up on my 12-year anniversary. So we've been working together over 14 years now. Can you believe that?
Yeah. And many more to come. And
Right.
probably until the day we die.
I know, right? So a couple other things on the marketplace that are interesting to me would be things like which vendor offers free shipping, which vendor offers professional services, which vendor offers delivery, which vendor offers white glove service, which vendor has it in stock where. I remember one client we were doing that sold on their marketplace. They had 11 distribution centers across the US and they sold railroad ties. And I'm like, well, that's weird. That doesn't seem to be a huge market for that. And they're like, well, typically, like right now we're doing the new, and I don't remember which one it was. I think it was like either the new Cowboys or Denver Stadium or something. And we sold 1.7 million timbers to that one. And I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
and so one of the things when we were talking about that project with that client was the shipping. And I said, well, and we started talking about the 11 distribution centers. And he said, look, there's no way anybody delivers 1.7 million timbers in one shot, nor do they install them in one shot. So let's say, for example, they were building the Denver Stadium and there's only 200,000 available in the Salt Lake office. The rest of them have to come from Texas.
Right.
Somebody might do that because they know that they need those first 100,000 in 3 weeks and they could get those from Salt Lake and the shipping will be cheaper, and they can wait on the others. So they'll buy out everything in Salt Lake, but they don't have to worry if the other ones take a little longer because they don't need them yet. And they'll be, so there's all kinds of weird things when you're doing these huge projects that go out to bid like this that come into play. So I want to know, especially depending on, you mentioned it earlier, the type of project and services I need, right? I want to know that those things that are important to my job are available and or that the wizard or the request process allows me to address that, right? So
Right.
I need this, but I need it in 4 shipments because I can't have you shipping 1.7 million timbers because we don't even have the lot cleared yet, right? So I need, 300,000 once a month for the first 4 months and then the balance at the end or something like that, right? And so there's a lot of weird stuff that we want to make sure to deal with. So I'm going to start talking. Let's ping pong this next section, right? So let's
Okay.
talk
Awesome.
about the platform features. So what I'll do is I'll throw out a feature. I might throw out a use case, and then you tell me how either our platform or how a platform should have this or should be able to address it or how they technically do address it, right? So first off, And you're welcome to dive back in. I love the validation process. You bet. We deal a lot in our auction sites with that, right? Validating and verification, the bidding process, the sellers, and sometimes they'll go through credit checks, or sometimes they have to put a credit card that could be run for 25 grand to make sure they have the money, or sometimes they have to, if it's a real estate, they have to have their pre-approval from the bank submit, whatever it is, right? There's different validation process. So talk about just the platform's ability to support multiple vendors and all the different things that entails.
Yeah, that's a good topic in general. I think having different vendors going through a quote request process, but also a process of maybe purchasing a sort of an item like you were talking about, where the inventory might be split across multiple locations and they all have the same inventory item, but maybe it's across different locations. It even could be a scenario where, let's say that someone owns a franchise and they're purchasing supplies for the franchise, and they need to go into the marketplace and purchase the same set of items for each franchise, and they need to know that it's going to be of a certain quality. And so maybe different suppliers or vendors in those different regions can supply inventory for a few stores, but they wouldn't be able to fulfill for all the stores all over the US, for example. And so the list goes on. I mean, this could, be international as well.
Yeah.
And so ultimately the big theory here is asking yourself, sort of what I like to do is say, what are the scenarios that a buyer is going to encounter? What are they going to be expecting? What's going to be ideal for them? And then making sure that the software that you're looking at, the marketplace software, is going to have the capability that you will need. And a lot of times what we find is that the business itself has much more in-depth requirements than what the software can provide. And so we just encourage you to be really pressing into the weeds around that. Especially with multi-vendor. And another big thing is being able to search and filter and find vendors quickly and easily. Being able to deal with just the overall transaction process that's going to occur. And I don't know, Ron, if you want to kind of hit on some of the details of that. There's quite a bit of detail to the logistics and fulfillment, the tracking, and some of the commissions and the commission payout. I think those are also really key topics to get into as well, right?
Yeah, we'll cover some of those. I've got some of those here on the list of things that we'll go back and forth. So we'll hit some of those along the way, and then we'll round out anything we missed. All right. So if you noticed, we did a quick intermission. We did a quick clothing change, and we're back. We were talking about the manual quoting vendor portal, and Chris just explained basically what a multi-vendor portal is. And so now what we're doing is we're ping-ponging back all the different features that are needed in a multi-vendor portal. So we'll kind of ping-pong it in that I'll try to describe what the feature is, and then Chris will go, and here's how we build it, implement it, or how the platform should be able to support it. So the first and main one that we actually talked about a little bit earlier was the reviews, right? We talked a little bit about the reviews. One of the things that you mentioned that I really wanted you to dive into is, let's say Clarity wants to go in and be in this quoting process to do web development, which we've done for 17 years, 1,500 portals, 4,000 integrations. I mean, we're more than qualified. But if we went to this new marketplace and we signed up, we would have no reviews on that marketplace and nobody would hire us, and we would fail miserably because we can't get out of the gate. So you brought up a comment about potentially a vetting process, potentially an integration to some third party. You talked about some other things. I'd love you to dive into what are some of your thoughts on how do we get those vendors jump started, and what are some of the things technically we could do in the platform to enable that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ron. And I think there are a couple of different key facets to consider. The first is, does it make sense to possibly syndicate content, at least for a time, for new vendors, or even to complement reviews within your marketplace? And this is definitely something that would need to be visibly clear to your users, that the reviews are coming from some other platform, but they can be complementary and helpful to users to see external reviews from other systems. There are pros and cons to this, and without going into a ton of detail, there are just a lot of nuances when a new vendor gets started. such that it's not necessarily going to be quick and easy for them to get reviews. And so if there isn't a lot of volume in your marketplace, or you're starting a new category that you want to expand, you may want to look at creative ways to allow a vendor to get credibility and sort of have a encouragement to get involved in the marketplace without necessarily having to do a lot of backbreaking work to get reviews. Now, the other thing, with that being said, is that the other part of reviews is making it as friction free as possible and providing some form of incentive both to the seller and the buyer within your marketplace to conduct reviews. And this is something that can be gamified. It's possible to make it into a system where, the seller actually gets better ranking and search results. And we all know about that. We all know about the ability to possibly have lower cost ads. These are all standard types of thoughts within a marketplace. But similarly with the buyer, there may be benefits that we want to offer them based on them leaving a review. And there's a lot of nuance to this too, because we don't necessarily want the buyer to be encouraged to only leave positive reviews. So
Right.
we want them to feel comfortable leaving a negative review if they need to, and a positive review. And so ultimately there needs to be consideration, and I would typically refer to this as governance, or what are the rules and the sort of standards and norms that your marketplace operates within. And so, Ron, I think it's just really interesting looking at some of the nuances that might apply based on different businesses and what's going to make sense for their buyers and sellers in a marketplace, right?
Yeah. Yeah, matter of fact, we've done this for a couple others, and the way we did it, one of them was a platform like Autotrader.com that sold horse trailers, and we had, and they didn't sell anything, right? They were just a marketplace. They came to us, wanted us to build a marketplace, and they were going to showcase. And the way they were going to make money and monetize it is they were going to go out and have a platform where all the manufacturers and all the dealers nationwide could post any trailers for sale. And then we did some customizations where if Ron went to go look for a trailer, but he wanted a used trailer, he only wanted to spend 7 to 10 grand that could fit 4 horses, that was 50 miles away from Galveston, Texas, that there would be a way to search for that. And if it wasn't available, he could put out a quote for that. He could put out a scout that says, hey, if any trailer becomes available within these parameters, automatically notify me. So we had this great platform. And part of how they solved the way we helped them solve the problem we just talked about is we allowed the dealers and the manufacturers to actually have a directory entry. So it was kind of like, the old days, they called it Yellow Pages, right? Now it's called, I think, a business directory. So what we did was, in conjunction with the marketplace, we had a business directory. So even if a brand new dealer would sign up and wanted to put some trailers for sale, it would show the dealer's name. You would click on the dealer's name. It would take them to their directory, and you could see their Google reviews. You could see their WG2 reviews. You could see their SourceForge reviews. You could see a link to their LinkedIn, their Facebook, anything that they wanted to in this nice directory listing. So even if they were brand new, they were able to bring forth and showcase their clout, if you will, and drum up some business. And then obviously on that platform, garner the reviews that Chris just talked about. So one of the interesting things that I'd love to have you talk about that's a little more technical in nature is kind of what we did for UAG with the manual quoting process. It was a wizard, right? And so Ron wants to go and he wants to put a bid out to find a vendor that's willing to, pick your poison, paint my house, but it's 27,000 square feet. And, I want a bid and I want, multiple contractors and all that. And I can put it out for bid. That's kind of what we're talking about here. So pick a scenario, and you can make up any one that you like, and walk through the process of what these wizards can do and what it takes for the platform to support and build one of these wizards to create this quoting process. Because you got the front end, I want a bid, but then you've got that bid goes out to, and you got to figure out how to assign to the 75,000 vendors that might be qualified to bid on that. Then when they get the bids back, you got to get all those 75,000 bids back to Ron. And then Ron has to sort through all those and then communicate with all the vendors and then approve and pick one and all the notification. I mean, there's a big amount of things that need to be touched. So I'd love for you to kind of dissect that technically and walk through that process, if you would.
Absolutely. I think it is really, like you said, I mean, there's a lot of nuance here. And one of the things that we always talk about on this channel is crawl, walk, run. And this is so important with technical pieces because it sort of amplifies the capital expenditure whenever you're both learning something new for your business and what works for buyers and sellers, as well as incorporating technology. It's just the reality of the situation. So it really is best to try to use something that's heavily configuration based whenever you're looking at a marketplace and something like this with a quoting process. Try to use what's already been proven that works to at least start and validate that customizations make sense for your specific space.
Right.
Now, with that said, yes, I think ultimately one of the most critical things that we're seeing nowadays is making it so that when there is a need for a quote, there's essentially intuitiveness and intelligence built in. And a lot of times that comes by reducing visual clutter, but still allowing for access to more specificity. So, for example, if someone wants to make a quote, they may want to just generally put a brief description, post very vague information, and then get people to start talking with them. That may be best in a particular marketplace. In other scenarios, that may be basically worthless. And so we may want to sort of qualify to the quote requester the more detail they provide or the more specificity and the more firmness that they provide about their expectation to actually pull the trigger and accept a quote and to receive reviews even possibly of them as a quote requester. You can get sophisticated about how you encourage both parties to keep moving ahead. But we basically want to make sure that the quote requester provides enough detail and has the ability to do that in a systematic way. So this might include autocomplete with products. It may include a form of, bringing in AI to expand on something that they're saying and then provide detail and ask them to accept. It may be an upload where they can upload documents. The other thing is making it so that they can chat and interact in real time and or via other modes of communication like email or text even with sellers. A lot of times the sellers or the folks that are going to respond to a quote, they're going to be busy. They're not going to be watching for this quote request all day long. So we need to make sure that we're considering that they will and sort of assume that they're going to be busy and that we need to provide them with different modalities. So, text, possibly an auto phone dialer, even if they want, email, of course, in system or in app notifications. What form of notification do they want? And then similarly, making it so that the buyer and seller, the quote requester and the quoting parties can actually talk. A lot of times they'll have questions. And of course, if someone's putting a quote request in over a marketplace, they probably don't want a bunch of cold calls hammering them, within their particular business, right? And so they probably don't want people to get their cell phone number from some of the different lead sites that are out there and start hounding them. So what level of anonymity does the quote requester need on your site? And what level of consideration do you want to give to this as to when in the sequence their information should be revealed and the parties can get in touch with each other? So there's a lot to unpack there, obviously. And these are things that we just really encourage you to think about who you're working with, what they've done, and what is configurable, what is off the shelf versus custom, right, Ron?
Right. Yeah, so you touched on a lot of it there, right? The ability to communicate back and forth. Okay, Chris, if I hire you as a vendor, I love your thing. Do you have 3 bricklayers that are available to come do the wall first because we need to start there before we can move on to the painting, things like that. Some of that communication has to go back and forth. Are you supplying the bricks? Do I have to get that too? There's a lot of nuance, especially when you start getting into these service marketplaces where there's local work being done and services are added on top of the products. It's really easy when you're just ordering products. It's just shipping and how long does it take till the parts get here, right? That's pretty straightforward. But you can get really nuanced when you do some of these services directories. And then obviously the last part, just being able to convert once you find and pick your vendor, being able to convert that to an order. Part of that conversion ends up being what we call kind of a drop shipping, right? Because the order has to be a twofer. For example, let's say you spent, and I'm picking a number out of the air, $150,000 to build this marketplace. So it's your marketplace. You're trying to monetize it. You're trying to make money. But for the most part, all of the vendors out there are the ones making the money and doing the services. So how do you get your cut? Well, when the orders come in, you're the one that brought the clients to them. So you're going to take whatever, a 10% finder's fee, call it whatever you want. And you get to decide that as the platform owner. And then when the payments come through, if you want, that's how you can get paid. The payments are made from the person to you through your platform. And then you release the funds as the services are rendered in kind of an escrow way, but that allows you to take your 10% off the top. So the order has to be split. The order has to come to you to determine how you're going to handle the order. And so the money comes in and you're guaranteed to get your cut. And the order has to then also go to the vendor. Reporting also has to be split. So there's some technicality there. I don't know if you want to add anything onto that before we start talking about the commissions, because I think we need to dive into that commissions piece a little bit. So I'll turn it back over to you and let you talk a little bit about that orders tracking now that we've split the order theoretically, right?
Yeah. And this is pretty interesting because a lot of our clients work in these very detailed B2B and really D2C, seller to consumer. I mean, the acronyms seem like they go on forever, but ultimately these different scenarios where you have multiple parties involved, and it's sort of a multi-tiered scenario to get all of the fulfillment done. And so we not only need to be able to track the shipment and the status and all of the logistics and the costs and possibly accessorials or add-on fees that occur and track those back appropriately, damage, insurance, returns, etc. And so that's, like you said, Ron, that's why we're splitting these orders out. They're coming from different areas, but we also need to be able to track the sales and the analytics. And so, if I'm selling something in a marketplace, I want to know that it's working and I want to know what I'm making in margin. I want to understand if things are getting better or worse. And these are basic pieces of information that everyone expects from a marketplace. So whenever we're looking at commissions in particular, what kind of model is there to be able to break things down in a way that match your business? Some clients look at commissions on the price of the item. Some look at it with all of the total cost involved. So they'll actually include shipping. You may have different scenarios based on how you operate your business. And there may also need to be chargebacks. So what if they receive commissions, but they should get a chargeback before they get the next commission? And again, the list goes on. It's just, there's a lot of detail there that we can apply. So, and I would say too, Ron, the other thing that's really non-trivial for some clients that have commissions is making sure that this all syncs back to the correct accounts and account segments within the accounting and ERP system, respectively.
Right.
So all of this has to be, an accounting output as well, right? So there's a lot of nuance to commissions, of course, the reporting and automating that reporting, but also sending the funds to the appropriate account and just the mechanics, as you well know, the mechanics of sending funds. You would think nowadays it would be really easy to do. And there are some great solutions for that, but they're not, it's not as easy as just working with your payment processor and saying, hey, can you just send it the other way? And I can just send money to these folks. It doesn't work that way, right?
No. No, matter of fact, I was on the phone this morning with two of my partners, my payment partners, and I've got a client over in Japan that's trying to process funds. And theoretically, you'd think that'd be easy because you take credit cards. But the big question is, well, where's the bank that we're depositing the funds? And if the bank's not in Canada or it's not in the US, then we can't sign with a. I mean, it's just crazy, like you said, in this day and age that exchanging funds is so difficult. But it really is. It's a big part of the business and where Clarity plays a lot daily. So I kind of hid this one. I saved the most difficult, in my opinion, the most difficult, but sometimes the most rewarding feature for last. This one's a fun one. I like to call it hard and soft stops. You can call it restrictions, contingencies, you can call it whatever you want, but I'm going to go through an example and then I'm going to ask you to talk through how we've implemented it on our platform because I've seen it and it is quite complex. And I might even pop up a couple screenshots on the screen when I go to post produce the video. So let's say a hard and soft stop. Well, the easiest one for me to give you is Costco. I can go to Costco and I can buy Heinz ketchup, but it's a soft stop. They stopped me from buying a single bottle of ketchup. They forced me to buy 228-ounce gallon jugs of ketchup in a bundle, or I can't buy it. Or if I want to go buy some croissants or even a loaf of bread, it comes in a 2-pack. Or if I want to go buy some croissants, it's a 24-pack, right? They do and bundle and sell everything in bulk, and that's how they get their discount. And then they extend that discount. So me as a buyer, I'm limited on how I can buy because there are some hard and soft stops on the way I can purchase different items. These marketplaces are the same way. We did one for a pool manufacturer, and each of the individual vendors could say, listen, you can buy pumps from us, but because we're giving this discount in this buyer's group marketplace, you have to buy 10 pieces at a time or a whole pallet, or you have to buy them by the case. If you want to crack open a case and only buy 5 instead of 12, then you have to pay a $50 override fee, which would be a soft stop. A hard stop would be, no, you have to buy by the case. I'm sorry, you can't buy 5. You have to buy a dozen. That's a hard stop. A soft stop would say, stop, you have to buy 12, or you can pay an override fee of $50. We'll crack the case open, ship you 5. And now we have to deal in the warehouse with these cracked open cases. So we're going to bill you for that because of the inconvenience. And that's a soft stop. Soft stops can also be, you have to buy a total of 10 items to get free shipping. I know you only want these 5 pumps. Here are these 5 filler items. We sell these bags of salt for everybody's water softener. Everybody needs that. If you want to fill up your cart to have 10 items, you can fill it up with this buffer product, we call it, and you can throw another 5 bags of salt in there, and then we'll let you go ahead and buy the 5 pumps without having to pay for 10 pumps, right? Things like that. So hard and soft stops can be really complex because they're almost infinitely configurable. So I want you to dive in and talk technically, how do we deal with hard and soft stops? And what is the magic that allows that to happen on a platform like this?
I mean, that is ultimately one of the things that I think is so interesting about the software that we architected is it does have the ability to be infinitely flexible. Just to your point, I think a lot of times clients really need an opinionated approach, at least to start. But a lot of our clients, I'm sure you would agree with this, Ron, they've been operating for quite some time. They have a lot of success with their business, and in most cases, they're growing, if not growing substantially. So I think fundamentally, we would just say, you know, whether you work with our marketplace platform or another, one of the big questions with hard and soft stops is, does it scale well? Because having functionality is one thing, but just to your point, it can be really complex. One of the things that we've seen in practical usage of it is, you know, being able to deal with different group orders where there are hundreds of people interacting around hard and soft stop rules, and possibly, you know, processes with supply and inventory and, you know, logistics. This can get quite non-trivial. Doesn't mean it's not doable, but can the system handle scale? And then just to your points about the definition of hard and soft stops, how clear is that to the user? That's one of the other pieces that I think is sort of non-trivial sometimes for folks, is to remember we're building software that's functional, but it also needs to be intuitive and easy for your user. Otherwise, the
Usable.
business is actually going to have regression potentially because things are too
Yeah.
complex. And
Right.
so I think fundamentally you want to be asking these questions constantly, through the process. And, we talk about this a lot, Ron, where a lot of the software is going to be catered to your business. This is great in practice, or well, really in theory, but in practice, I would say that fundamentally that can actually make it really challenging that a lot of things can be customized. Ultimately, as a result, you really want to make sure that you're thinking about what is going to make that, in particular, the hard and soft stops. This really gets me thinking in that line of thought. What makes it something that is completable and doable for your users? So,
Yeah.
um, it is necessary and really important for certain businesses that hard and soft stops be there. Otherwise, they really can't promote and build momentum around certain activities, clearing out certain inventory, and getting items, shipped. Especially with group orders, it's kind of tough to incentivize people to make large group purchases unless there's actually an incentive and maybe a time limit as well. So
Right.
those are just some details, and I know that's kind of all over the place, but the sort of the boil it down to a single point would be, it's very complex. Make sure you check it that it actually works and scales, and you're thinking about that. And also just make sure you're putting yourself in the shoes of the user at the end of the day. And I think a lot of what we look at looks at that, right, Ron? It's what is the user's experience?
Yeah, it's most important. I mean, even for me in marketing, I remember, I don't know how many times you and I modified the simple quote request form on our website in the 12 years that I've been here, right? It's like, it would be really helpful if the salesperson had all this information. So Chris is like, I can build that form, and he builds that form. And the next thing you know, registrations are down 40%. And we're trying to figure out why. And then it's like, oh yeah, we went back and added 20 new fields to this form. People are feeling like they're going to get spam. Oh, let's go reduce the fields down to 3 fields and get just the basic information. And then we get information, and then we don't have enough information for the salespeople, and they're complaining. So it is a dance, right? Just because you can do something in the marketplace for your business doesn't mean it's going to help promote or improve customer satisfactions or conversions. You've got 3 different audiences here. You have yourself as the platform owner to make sure that the business is profitable and functioning, and you can service and grow the business and make changes as the business changes. 2, you're servicing all the vendors and suppliers. You have to have an incentive to bring them to want to do business on your platform. And then 3, you've also got all the consumers and the businesses that are coming to buy on your platform. So don't forget, and I loved Chris's sage advice there. Don't forget, you've got 3 different audiences. Just because you can do doesn't mean you should do. So anyway, that's all we got for today. Thanks again for all your comments. Please throw a like on the video, leave some comments on what you'd like to see us talk about in our next Tech Talk. And Chris, do you have anything else to close us out?
No, thanks for watching again. Bye for now. Look forward to seeing you in the next one.
Bye for now.